just if there were two
I'm-
switches.
I'm sure
Because-
you're,
Find out if we can hear someone on Zoom.
yeah. Okay, I think we're up and ready whenever, Andy. Yep, we still have a minute.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Pleasant View Planning Commission meeting for December 7th, 2023 at 6 p.m. So we'll go ahead and get started at this time. To start out, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance and an opening prayer, and I think we got this evening for you. All rise, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for you this evening, the opportunity as planning commission to come and represent the citizens of this community. We ask you to be with us, that we be mindful of the tasks that are set before us, so we'll be able to make good decisions for this wonderful community. We ask you, Father, to bless and watch over our servicemen, the firefighters, and police officers that work so hard for us. We ask you to be with us throughout this evening and throughout this community. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Okay, all the commissioners have probably had a chance to read the agenda and the items for the meeting tonight. Is there anyone that needs a declaration of conflicts of interest? Anything on the agenda? Okay, no declaration of conflicts of interest. We'll move on to item 2, meeting minutes approval. David, I'll jump in.
In light of the 120 pages we had to read for tonight, I would motion that we postpone review of the minutes until a future meeting.
So we'd like to table the minutes for the meeting. We have a motion to move to next time. We have a second. I'll second the motion. Second, in discussion, if everybody's ready for it, move it forward, but if not, we'll just move it to the next meeting.
I would ask administration, is there any reason that it would be essential to have them before the next meeting?
And all in favor, say aye. Aye. And if we can, let's make sure we get a chance to really peruse it. And I did like the highlighted yellow highlights on the ones that were called out, so that was we have a very busy and full agenda. November was very light for us, and it looks like it's piled up for us tonight. So just a quick quorum. I thank everybody first for attending tonight. Normally we don't get this big in attendance, so it's nice to have other people here. We will try to keep it moving along, so some of those that are on the later part of the agenda won't be stuck as long. We have a couple items that will be public hearings. At the public hearing, most of these items will ask for staff to present, and then we'll ask for the petitioner if they have any comments on the agenda before us, and then the discussions will take place up there with the commission. There are 2 items that have public hearing. We'll ask for a public comment. It just regurgitates it's the same thing over and over, and we'll just ask if there's anything that's different than what's been presented. So we make sure we keep it moving, but everybody is heard in a timely manner. So we'll try to keep it moving. Our first item, administrative item, is consider reviewing the site plan for hot iron commercial at approximately 11:45 west, 2700 north. And, Brandon will be, presenting this for us at this time, so staff.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application that's been submitted for a site plan approval for a site that already has a large portion of the site that has an approved site plan and operating businesses with business licenses. The applicant specified that they would like to pursue approval for the site plan with the two proposed uses of sit-down restaurant and office use. Two of the suites would be proposed for sit-down restaurant and an office would be in the third suite of the buildings. It should be noted that the buildings, however, are designed with drive-through lanes to enable them to have a future option of having drive-through restaurants in the buildings. However, it needs to be noted that drive-through uses are conditional uses in the C2 zone. We've had a couple of discussions with the applicant on that topic, informed them of that, and that in order to put fast food restaurants in the C2 zone, given that conditional use status, they would need to come back to the planning commission to have an approved conditional use permit. The way our code reads, it states that conditional use permits need to be approved at the same time as site plan. And so they need to come back for that conditional use permit with consideration for any amendments to the site plan. But staff does feel comfortable with them moving forward with these permitted uses, as long as they have that understanding that they need to come back if they change any conditional uses. And they have, in addition to that, they understood that they are moving forward with the proposed amount of parking based on the proposed permitted uses, and that may need to be adjusted with the conditional use. But in addition to that, when you switch from a permitted use to a conditional use in the state code, the standards change somewhat. You can vary from the strict reading of the ordinance to consider something called a reasonably anticipated detrimental effect. What that means is if there's anything that the commission can reasonably identify that would cause a problem to adjoining properties or a negative impact to adjoining properties, that additional conditions can be specified in order to mitigate or in other words lessen the impact of the conditional use. You cannot require standards so strict that you try to entirely eliminate the impacts, but you can work to lessen them. You can add some custom conditions under that situation. So because the applicant's making a financial investment with this, we'll try to be very clear about that conditional uses would need to come back, and adjustments to the site plan, traffic flow or something else may need to be needed if that use were to change. This is again in the C2 zone. The applicant has again proposed 3 suites for the building, and in the interest of time, I'll just state that the building in all respects meets the applicable setbacks by a large margin. There is a statement in the code with regards to a landscaped area. It states in 1827-040 regarding front yard, says the minimum setback for buildings and parking shall be 20 feet. Such areas shall be landscaped except for access drives and pedestrian accommodations. And so the operative term here that's under question would be access drives. Staff interpretation of that term is strictly limited to the access onto the site, that's used to access the site from the street, the public street. And so staff is of the opinion that the drive-through lanes do not qualify as access drives, but that's our perspective. It's the commission's determination to determine if the drive-through lanes would qualify as an access drive, and therefore there would be any issue relating to whether that 20-foot could be lessened or not. But it's staff's perspective that only applies to access drives, to the exception to the 20-foot landscaped area. If the second drive-through lane is eliminated, the site plan would easily be able to meet the 20-foot landscaping requirement. And if you recall, this 20-foot landscaping area has been, the same code provision has been enforced on multiple site plans in recent months that have come under the same zoning as well. Again, the building does meet the setbacks with regards to the rear setback. I've just requested as staff that as a recommended condition that they provide a distance from the wall of the building to the rear property line, which is opposite of 2700, and the rear property line and or curb from one of the existing buildings, just in the interest of assisting with the issues related to positioning the building for at the time of building permit. The applicant has stated that the height of the building at the tallest point is 25 feet. It's well within the permitted height limitations. Those are actually 5 stories or 65 feet, so it's not even within the realm of exceeding those. There is a dumpster, provided there was an inaccuracy. I did not identify that on the site plan. As has been pointed out to me, and so have to make that correction. We also have in the code for this zone a requirement for 15% of the site to be attractively and permanently landscaped. The applicant has provided, as you've seen in the packet, a landscaping plan that's included both a separate landscaping plan and then it shows plans as well on that. So I think the third page of that site. It does exceed the minimum requirement at 20.3%. Appreciate the cooperation of the applicant on that issue. And the 20.3% is being applied only to the portion of the site that is being approved tonight, because the rest of the site has already been approved and has vested rights. The applicant does have a secondary water letter for the site, but there are conditions to that. Secondary water is a requirement of our code, and so the provider has stated that they will provide secondary water with the requirement that it's a drought-resistant plant, no turf landscape on the property or of the property, and that there needs to be a backflow device and other devices installed on the irrigation line. And so in order to meet our requirement, that they effectively need to meet that requirement, because that's the condition to get secondary water. And so staff recommends that they be permitted to make any adjustments to the landscape plan to conform with the above requirements from the secondary water provider if needed. But also maybe actually more important than that if the drive-through lane is not determined to not qualify as an access drive, that they be permitted to adjust the landscape plan to meet that 20-foot landscaping area requirement along the front of the lot, which is from 2700 is considered the front yard of the lot. And then also staff recommends that any minor adjustments to the landscape can be delegated to be approved by staff in case there are issues just relating to the placement of any water lines, tree root zones, so there's not a conflict there, as there have been on at least one site landscape plan in the past. Another issue is that there's a specific requirement for 1 tree per 300 square feet that's spelled out in our landscaping standards for this zone. That standard is met at 1 tree per 285 square feet, thus meeting the standard with 30 trees and 8,554 square feet of landscaping. With regards to parking, there's 3 suites, but 2 proposed uses, because 2 of the uses that are proposed, one of the uses that's proposed is for 2 different suites. So those suites are being proposed as under the sit-down restaurant category. what that leaves is 1,200 square feet approximately for each, suite. That would require 12 for each restaurant, plus 5, for each, restaurant for employees, which puts the standard at 24 for those two, building suites, or sorry, 34 for those two building suites. And then the office use would need to provide, one stall at, per 250 square feet, which would lead to 39 total stalls. The applicant has identified on, one of the exhibits, their, parking exhibit, as providing 40 stalls. They're identifying stalls that are part of the existing site plan that's already been approved for usage on this site. The ordinance does permit, some flexibility at the discretion of the planning commission with regards to parking. There's 42 currently left for the existing uses. There's 4, suites in the building that's just to the south on the same site, which involve a restaurant, a flooring company, a day spa, and then sort of a memory conversion studio to convert, I think, analog memories and photos and things to digital. So the planning commission has the discretion to determine if they feel that the parking provided is sufficient for the for this additional use to be put on the site. And staff recommended that the applicant was welcome to provide case studies relating to similar situations demonstrating that the parking is sufficient. We do have a parking agreement that all uses on the site may share parking. It is a very general clause in that parking agreement. If the commission feels that there's a need to amend that, that could be a condition of approval to meet the parking requirement. Staff would recommend that that the commission consider whether any adjustments to that parking agreement be made or not. And then if the commission does determine that the parking agreement should be adjusted as a condition of approval, that certificates of occupancy not for these new suites not be issued for the buildings as part of the site plan prior to the number of additional stalls determined to be needed for the uses, or some more detailed agreement between the users. It is my understanding is it's all one property owner, so I wouldn't anticipate that would be difficult, but that's something to discuss with the applicant potentially if they have concerns with that. There is a clause regarding parking lot lighting that says parking lot lighting shall be required for any lot that's over 10 spaces in size. There are parking lot lights that are currently in place in the existing parking lot. Planning commission can determine if they feel that more are needed. It's what's being added is not a particularly it's not a large parking lot, and it's separated into a couple of different sections, and so that's one thing to take into consideration. And those, if the commission determines that additional parking lot lighting should be added, those should be added to the civil plans in order to meet the lighting requirement. That covers all of my substantive comments. Just a couple of technical notes that the applicant should be aware that if an approval is provided by the commission, it's granted with conditions, and it's not a carte blanche approval. Those conditions need to be met generally before before a building permit in this case. Generally speaking, not all of them, it depends on them, but that those conditions need to be met in order for forward progress to continue to be made. And that will assist us in working productively with the applicant. I've included a little bit of a different section in the staff report. At the very bottom, you'll notice that I've summarized the recommended conditions of approval, but I've also put a separate section above that states items to be addressed and resolved. I'm not, as staff, recommending a particular solution on any of these. I'm just stating that these should be resolved prior to considering or as part of any approval or as a basis for tabling if they can't be resolved or something to that effect. So I'll go through these 4 items. It says that the commission should determine if the 20-foot landscaping area is required and work with the applicant to determine a path forward to achieve it. If so, Adjustment to the landscape plan should also be permitted to accommodate the 20-foot landscape area if it's determined that landscape area is required at the front of the site. The commission, second issues of the commission should determine if the parking provided by the applicant is sufficient, or if not, the appropriate amount of parking to be required by the applicant for the proposed and existing uses, as detailed earlier. One tool for addressing this issue includes the possibility of requiring an adjusted parking agreement for the site. The planning commission should also determine that the applicant should add additional parking lot lighting, and the planning commission should work with the applicant to determine if and the last one's a new issue because that actually wasn't decided. And I just overlooked it, and I apologize for that again regarding the dumpster. So I'm just going to go over again the recommended conditions of approval. They are as follows: any adjustments to the site plan and landscaping that are required to implement solutions to the above items, or any other conditions of approval that are including but not limited to adjustment of the width of the landscaping area and similar issues. The next recommended condition is that the applicant provide a distance from the existing curb on the north side of the parking lot or from the rear property line for construction purposes. Next, the staff recommends that minor adjustments to the landscaping be delegated, be approved by staff in case there are issues relating to conflict between tree root zones, water line placement, and similar issues. Staff further recommends that if the parking agreement needs to be adjusted, that again, certificate of occupancy should not be issued for the building as part of the site plan prior to those stalls being constructed and provided. If required, any additional parking lot lighting needs to be addressed and added to the civil plans in order to meet that lighting requirement. One issue that I overlooked in the initial comments is that staff also recommends that a 2.5-foot button needs to be provided for the code as part of the approved plans. That is a requirement that's listed in the code and wasn't demonstrated on the plans to my understanding. Staff also recommends that minor adjustments to the building location within the requirements of the city code that do not affect setbacks, landscaping requirements, or parking layout be permitted. The next issue is that the requirements of the city engineer's review memo and plan notes and red lines be met, and then the requirements of the fire marshal's review memo, and then just necessary signatures, building permits, or certificates of occupancy will not be provided until conditions of approval of any site plan approval granted are met. And that is everything that I have. Yeah. You know, that was a lot, so I'm trying to lower the tempo a little bit. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer those.
Do you have questions for staff on the presentation?
I have a question. You talked about an amendment to the shared parking agreement, which might be needed. Is that correct?
It's a possibility. It's the commission's determination if that is felt to be a tool what enables that is that our code grants the commission the authority to provide flexibility on parking.
Yeah. The problem that I can see is I don't know what that shared parking agreement is.
It should have been included in the packet. There's basically a paragraph that says that they'll share parking. It doesn't have anything specific with regards to numbers, but that all stalls are essentially available to all users on the site. And so my point earlier on that topic was simply if you felt like there's some additional detail needed, you could specify that as part of the authority to regarding flexibility on parking.
I guess that might just to follow up, because that's one of the questions I had also. What would we want to require? I guess as in I used the example in the past that it's the same landowner or developer who's doing this. If he develops this and this group doesn't want to, there's too many people, they might not rent it because it's not a parking stalls in their mind, but it does meet our code.
Right.
It's just a matter of is there enough of those people renting those units that it meets their code, right? I mean, is it, but as long as they agree to share, and it's
Yeah.
not one of these that put up 15 signs and say, my place only.
To be clear, I'm not suggesting it should or should not be amended. I'm just providing it as a tool. The reason why I do bring it up is simply because what's being proposed are probably, particularly, obviously the drive-through possibility is not on the table, but they are proposing to sit-down restaurants. I'm guessing that those, if occupied as sit-down restaurants, would be significantly higher demand in parking than the uses on the other side of the site. So something regarding parking stall locations be reserved for on the south side of the site or something like that for those uses, something to that effect. I'm not trying to, I don't want to be alarmist about the issue. I just want to bring it up and say, maybe it's something you feel is necessary and maybe it's something that you don't. And if you don't, that's completely fine. And it's also something that the applicant could potentially shed more light on with regards to.
Can I ask a big picture question? All of this is right adjacent to the Frontliner station. I'm wondering what arrangements have been made by UTA or in the parking agreement if the Frontliner station should become active again.
Well, our most recent word on the Frontliner station, I know this won't likely be great news, but their anticipated timeline for reopening that is approximately 2040. So it's an issue that's quite a far ways off. I don't believe the applicants had any discussion with with UTA on that issue. But the primary issue that's being discussed tonight would be conformity with the ordinance, which it's conforming except as otherwise noticed.
Still, it would seem helpful to know if there is an arrangement in the shared agreement for some number of Frontliner station parking spots.
That's on the other side.
Yeah, Frontliner owns a property on the other side and it's undeveloped. It's for their future expansion.
So there was planned, so it really wasn't ever planned to be in this parking lot. Okay, because I mean, it would be ideal to have a sit-down restaurant next to the Frontliner station. But I know having used that Frontliner station, we always just drove up right where this restaurant is looking to be to let people off. I didn't actually see as many as 40 spaces. Just looking at the around the building, I only see 20 stalls. And then you got another 10 maybe in front. I don't see 40 on the parcel they're looking at.
So it's all one parcel currently. There is a black line that's it's not a formal proposition for a subdivision, but there is sort of a black line that's identifying where that would be. I counted it multiple times. There's one stall that's sort of half in across that property line where it's at an angle closer to the Frontliner station. And I assumed that they were counting that as one of the stalls that got them to 40. But I counted them multiple times and come up with 40. So,
But it's a combination on that lot and then 40 that are the adjacent that already exist.
yeah, that's a great one. So it's not an actual separate lot at this point. This is more a completion of a lot, but there are, I can understand why it would look like a separate lot. The area that's in lighter gray where you're getting, I believe the 20 from is the new construction portion. There's the property to the north of that where there's an additional, I believe it's 19 or 20 stalls, I believe is the number. But those are being allotted by the applicant to be for this, for these retail suites. They're just already currently constructed at this point. So they've got some aerial imagery that's darker than the new construction gray that's being used.
Any other questions for staff at this time?
Said one other question. On the landscaping in I don't know what page that would be, but section I, landscape areas adjacent to streets and parking shall include a 2.5 foot berm. Are we looking at that at all?
That was recommended, yeah, by staff to
That
the,
would be in front of the drive-through. Is there a space for such a berm?
well, it would be part of the landscape area, the 20-foot landscape area. That staff is recommending needs to be added. And so you wouldn't be able to visually tell it unless you're looking at what's called a section view of it. But we're looking, most of these documents are overhead bird's eye view. And so it's just saying you need to pull the soil up into a 2.5 foot. In the existing landscape area that's adjacent to 2700 more. We can, I don't know if there's a folder on the desktop.
Right here? You see?
Yeah.
Oh, do
So that'll help to show you where
you want me to just open the packet? or-
That's part of the discussion.
This one?
The creating 20 foot and then in the 20 foot.
Right.
So both of those are the 2 plans that need to be met, that are not spelled out.
that's 9 acres.
This one?
Yes, so if you could zoom in on that. So, Commissioner Gosner, in regards to your point, 2 issues. The first is this area right here is the area where the berm would be, need to be added for the ordinance. And so you wouldn't be able to see it in this view, but it would just be a matter of pulling the soil up 2.5 feet at the center of it and then sloping downwards to the sides is how they're typically done. And then staff is recommending also that this area of the landscape area needs to be per the ordinance expanded to 20 foot depth, which is approximately at the back of that second drive-through lane. But that issue is something that needs to be determined by the commission regarding the interpretation of the ordinance.
Any idea what the current section with the yellow section, what the depth of that is?
The current yellow section that's been constructed on for other properties or what this is.
Yeah,
I don't know exactly, but it's probably about 8 or 9 feet.
another additional 10 feet anyway.
Yeah. And then this is consistent with, we did a couple of plans earlier in the year, also in the C2 zone that were where this 20 foot requirement was brought into play as a requirement in the same zone.
Any other questions for staff? Go ahead and ask the petitioner to come up, state the name and that.
Hello, Geneva Blanchard, 1352 West 1015 North.
There's an on switch on the microphone if you don't mind. It might be at the bottom.
Here.
You want me to say that again?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay, Geneva Blanchard, 1352 1050 North. Okay, do you guys want to start with questions or can I answer some of your staff questions originally? Please, okay. Well, let's start with the parking agreement because you started there first. So the parking agreement actually is us and the adjacent lot because that's the whole subdivision. So as far as shared parking, we share parking with them, they share parking with us. There isn't really anything to add to that. There isn't, we can't require them to add stalls to their site. But each of us, whether they develop the front and we develop the side, whatever we do, all the parking on both sides become usable by both parties. So, and that agreement has a section of parking, the rest of it is all of your CCNRs and your development rules and rights. So as far as UTA is not allowed to use our stalls. They have the parking lot behind. When they fully open the station, it will be developed. So they technically cannot use our stalls. So that does not influence our parking there. Then I'm trying to think what the third question was. I have an exhibit as let's go into parking. And I'm not sure if Brandon sent this to you guys, but this might clear up how we decided,
Here.
how, can I have one actually though?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How we broke up the site. So it is one landowner, we're not subdividing, it's just site plan. However, being wise and thinking of the future, if there were ever a point where we needed to subdivide and do something different, we planned each building to be able to stand on its own. So we did this parking exhibit to show you that our new building does not affect the old building, and then if we were to be coming for site plan, that they can both stand alone. So hopefully that takes out the utilities, it takes out kind of the confusion on your civil set, so you can see how it's clearly marked and there's adequate parking for your code for each building to stand alone. So, and as far as parking goes, you have the back building, which has your more traditional tenants that are open 9 to 5. So when you talk about your front retail pad, that's more than likely going to be food service. hopefully those back tenants, they're closed, there's a little bit quieter of hours, more parking allowed, and historically, we kind of looked back for the last 10 years, and that parking lot just over the time is probably a quarter to a third full at most in the peak of the day. So there is plenty of parking out there. We've never had to say, oh gosh, we should turn some of this into parking lot. We need more parking, even with the addition of scooters, things like that. We've never had a problem or anyone complain. Next, at least on my list, is the landscaping. So, well, let's start with the 20-foot landscape buffer. Brandon and I differ on the interpretation of the code a little bit on this, because I would consider that second drive-through access road access to our drive-through, which is a key point to our building. So I consider it an access, that drive-through. And then historically on 2700 between I-15 and 27 or 89, none of those buildings have, for your portion, the Jimmy John's building, the Dutch Bros building, the Scooters building. I haven't seen the Beto's site plan, that was probably most recent, but none of them have a 20-foot landscape buffer. As well as none of them have a 2.5 foot berm either, which I think is a huge deterrent for the visibility of our building and to see traffic flow and things going on in that subdivision in itself to draw people to it. A 2.5 foot berm and to be the only site to have a 2.5 berm is relatively ugly. So that's my case on those two, is that even to match scooters, so where our drive-through lane matches and scooters lines up, if you pull up an aerial, our curb and gutter matches perfectly with scooters. Then we have the same landscape strip. It looks cohesive and blends right in with the front of the complex. So I'm afraid personally that doing this landscape piece and a berm, that our building will stand out in a not great way. So those are my pleads. Any other
Question
questions?
from the commission.
Would you address the lighting, in the
What?
parking stalls?
What was it like, just that we needed to add a couple?
Yeah, in the package, they talked about the need for lighting or.
And so originally the subdivision, the parking that's in it, is all common areas, so the lighting stays the same. There will be building lighting, exterior building lighting, and we are happy to add a couple light poles if that seems to be an issue. So I don't know who determines that and how we determine what is needed or is not needed, but if it's needed, we're happy to add it. We don't want anyone to feel unsafe. So.
Building lighting be sufficient. I mean, that's the parking lot lighting as is. And they're only having building one new level.
Yeah,
And then there's the areas to the west.
I'm not a lighting professional, but I would say that of all the parking scenarios, this is probably on a lower threshold
That's what I was,
for needing any additional lighting.
I mean, I would assume they would want some off the buildings to make sure that front area is illuminated, but. Other questions? Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Please go ahead and we'll open it up for the commissioners for questions, discussion.
I'm still concerned about front runner parking. Could someone please point out where they think they're gonna park on the same side of the tracks?
Hold the map.
Here, let me, yeah, no problem. Pull it up, no.
Oh, I just don't,
It's right behind the building, there's a big, huge empty spot.
so it was north, is it north of it?
It's north, it's right.
Here, I'll get it up.
It sits right there.
That's the front runner section.
Yes, right there.
Back in
You're making the meeting fun, Jeff.
Yeah, this front line, they all right there.
So, I'm not, who's the school of Bristol?
It's undeveloped right away from, you got, for front line.
So you're pretty sure you can, what that means?
No, it's right there.
But how are they gonna get up there?
There's no, you could have a train,
So it's just a walk around.
walk around.
I just don't see it happening.
It's right there.
So up here is this piece is owned by UTA, this upper portion, parcel
See all
ending in
that
008.
Part right there, that's for future expansion of, front runner.
And how do they get to the actual station?
Right there. No, it's actually, yeah, you can go right there, go there. There's public access
But
on it.
the actual, where you board the train is right on 2700.
There's a sidewalk all the way down.
Yeah, there's a sidewalk. Sidewalk.
Just wonder, I mean, you're gonna have the bulk of people thinking it's closer to park in your parking lot than in UTA's parking lot.
That's,
I know it's not your problem,
that will be their problem,
but I'm just wondering,
but it's no different than some of the other train stations. Have to walk out and go to parking and visit for in the open lot.
I mean, you may well find yourself putting up a fence or something to keep the UTA people from crossing your piece. I just question in my mind.
Any questions, thoughts?
Question for staff. Randy, can you tell us why as she brought up, why the other businesses along 2700 don't have that 20-foot landscape?
I don't know why they don't. What I do know is that it's directly in the code specifically for this zone, to have the 20 feet. I wasn't on staff here at Pleasant View when those were approved. And I didn't have time to research that particular issue. I would state, I don't know if you call it a point of order though, but that, past oversights do not diminish either the authority or responsibility of the planning commission to meet the code at present time. And it's also possible that prior approvals that the code requirements were not the same or in effect at this time. And so I think the operative issue on the table really is a matter of interpretation, just limited to the idea of access drives, but that's the commission's call. So.
I believe that at the time, for this discussion has come up several times before, is maybe not there. Why it was any other questions or comments before we start attacking some of these items that will be resolved? All right, let's go ahead, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and address some of the items to be resolved before we make a proposal. One of them is commission to determine if the 20-foot landscape area is required and work with the applicant to determine the path forward to achieve it. And so adjustment to landscape plan should also be permitted to accommodate the 20-foot landscape area that is determined the 20-foot landscape area is required in front. So based on the ordinance, when we require that, one way they could meet that is not having that drive through, which is a conditional permit at this time. And we're not asking for that conditional permit at this time. So what's the thoughts?
We start looking at what we live. How we spend the next.
And so maybe something we have to look at changing in our ordinance for the future. Even though right now, that's the idea, is that it's working in the fire. Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Dean, and, I'm looking at the site plan here, and it lines up really nice with scooters. And I know scooter site plan was done before my time on the commission, and I don't know what the requirements were at that point, but to me, it just feels like it should be, we should be consistent from one to the next. And I realize to Brandon's point, that I think there are some other projects using on 2700 North that are perhaps different, with a 20-foot buffer, I believe. But I think just for consistency purposes, and I'd be totally in favor of approving as is, with the way they got it, so.
And how can we approve it if that's not what's on the books?
I think, well,
I'm
you're right, I mean, but I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, can we remove that condition or that requirement? I just think like I said, just it fits in well with the existing landscape, and it just makes sense.
I would have to ask staff to help us out with this because
I don't believe there's a variance provision in the ordinance on this unless, correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan. And so, from staff's perspective, we would need to follow the ordinance. If there's a recommendation or desire for an ordinance modification from planning commission, it would need to go through that process and it may delay the developers. And so that may be a question to ask the developers whether or not they'd have interest in waiting out that process. And again, the results of such a process would not be a guarantee in going through that.
I would hate to see the ordinance just changed for this one property. And on other places on 2700 North, that 20-foot buffer, including the berm, probably are very beneficial. It was put there for a reason. And so basically, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, because it doesn't work on this one property, it doesn't work anywhere. So I think it would take more time looking at that ordinance and figuring out the benefits of the ordinance and if it needs to be changed. But for now, we've got the ordinance, and really generally we're obligated to go with the ordinance.
Is the applicant allowed to weigh in for a second?
It's up to the
Yes.
commission.
for a quick second,
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask you is, how would you like to address this? We're basically going down our items
Yeah.
to resolve, and the 20-foot is part of it. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you've already thought of this in some way.
Very much so. So from our perspective, if you look at statistically your market right now, we need both of those drive-throughs. 70% of your renters that come in along 2700 North need a drive-through. So if it causes us to push our building back and we lose a drive-through, it's not a building for us anymore.
But let me ask you this. You're saying do away with 20-foot, but then we also have a 2.5 foot per.
Yeah.
So we're basically saying we want to eliminate 2 of our ordinances. And we're not looking at that at this time.
And I would be willing to go the route of, if you guys are going to modify, if that was something you were talking about, waiting for you to modify, but right now, I mean, our building's gonna stick out like a sore thumb to be pushed back an additional 10 feet with a 2.5 foot berm in front. And now we've lost a drive-through. All of a sudden, something that becomes a profitable building is something now we just don't do. And it doesn't bring sales tax, it doesn't bring anything into the city.
You're saying this would kill your project?
More than likely, yeah.
Even though if you take one of the drive-throughs, got more than meets, put it in 20-foot.
Right, but then I lose a complete tenant. I go back to another office space and an office space pulls half of the rent rate that a drive-through tenant does. And then your building that's at the highest rate to build currently doesn't become feasible.
But the one last question is the drive-in, we're not addressing that one, that requires coming back for.
Right, but if I,
That's a whole other issue that we have.
yeah, but if my site plan still has to have a double drive-through, it still has to have that lane because that has to be built at construction.
Right.
And if I am not building it now, that means there is no drive-through in the future.
Okay.
So, that's fair.
Any other questions?
Maybe let Jim touch first.
We've already heard from commissioners, but somebody has other questions.
I've got an ordinance related issue.
You have what?
Ordinance related.
Yeah, I don't think so, but you could come up before, okay.
All I'll be very quick.
Keep it short.
I'm going right from the staff report. I think we're not asking for an ordinance change tonight, just an interpretation. On the code section on the second page says, minimum setback for buildings and parking shall be 20 feet. Such areas shall be permanently landscaped except for access drives and pedestrian accommodations. So it all comes down to interpretation. Is a drive-through considered an access or parking? The very purpose of parking is to be permanently parked. Even if this were a conditional use permit discussion tonight, the drive-through is never intended to be a parking stall, but an access.
But is that an access, is the access to the building I'm just driving to get to the building, or is that actually part of the business? Well, it's not access, it's actually part of the business.
Well, it's
Part of
never,
the process.
the whole purpose of the drive-through is to get through and to exit. To me, that's an access. So under that interpretation, we're not changing the ordinance. We're just interpreting the drive-through to be more of an access than parking.
Okay, thank you.
I would tend to agree with Jim on that, 'cause if you look at Scooter right next door, you've got about 10 feet right there. I just measured on Google Earth. Just about 10 feet right there, and that would be their access drive. And I think these guys are asking for the exact same thing. That would be my argument.
Can I ask a general question? Can anyone think of a building on 2700 North that actually has 20-foot and a berm? I like the 20-foot and a berm, nothing opposed to that. I'm just thinking about driving along there, all of the fun zone and the Mountain View Clinic. I can't think of any berms along 2700. They should have been, but why weren't they?
So, there are two site plans that were approved, I believe in March and August, that were at the Rush Fun Center, the Peak View lots 2, 3, and 4. And came through in two site plans that they were required to have the 20-foot. So those are,
Do they have a berm? I don't.
yes,
Do it?
both, yes, they do. And both of these ordinance were applied to be fulfilled, on those site plans. So I'm saying that in an attempt to answer your question.
About Mountain View Clinic, they have gravel areas, but I can't think of any raised area.
That's been there a long.
It has, I'm just.
Coming out to Brandon's. Research it. And that's always something that we can do tonight, is table it while we research what is an access versus a drive, and how it's accommodate versus, but as the ordinance stands today, it's by our interpretation of what's on it.
No, the practical part of things says it would look better without the berm, without that landscape. But we want to make sure that we comply with our ordinances. So if staff and administration can give us an idea on that, I have a hard time just ruling against an ordinance that's on the books that we had to count other people to, and then suddenly it's like we throw it out, and that's really not fair to other individuals who we have followed that ordinance. So, yeah, the practical part of me says, hey, it's great. But the other part, we need to make sure that we comply.
But I think what they're asking now is the interpretation of this access. And if you look at that right there on Scooter's copy, that's, and I did ask Brandon too, and I know he's listening, I know you probably have. But I asked him to go back and look at the minutes of it, because I don't know when this was, because it was before my time, to see what the interpretation was on this, because to me that is exactly the same as that.
But you have to remember, we're not looking at. No, I know, we're looking at.
I know.
Posters.
I agree, but
I keep bringing up.
I know, because that's my problem. My question is what was this, was that interpreted as an access drive? Because if it was, apply the same thing right there. Pretty simple. Because
Okay, let's go on to the second, let's take it. I was just gonna say, let's just move on from the first one, which led to hearing for just a second, and let's address the parking. Commission should determine if parking provided by the applicant is sufficient, and if not, appropriate amount of parking be required by the applicant. Open for general thoughts.
I think parking is sufficient. They've got a shared parking agreement. It's the same owner. I'm fine with the parking.
I tend to agree, similar to the ones that we had come over in those type of subdivisions by the fun center is, it's shared, and if someone doesn't want to bring their place in, they don't think they have sufficient parking, and that's up to them. So, any other thoughts other than that? Okay, planning commission should determine if applicant should add additional parking lot lighting. We need to address that one. If anybody wants specifics added to it.
No, I think she addressed that.
And the dumpsters no longer needed. We have all the other recommended items, it's mostly all being very open. So if there is a recommendation for anything, we need to make sure we address each of the three items and set also with the staff recommendation. Just as a reminder, we can table this and ask for more clarification on specific notes. They can delay the petition. The petitioner said they'd almost be willing to do that. We can reject it, or of course we can always reject it, or we can approve based on the following conditions, but we would need to spell out what conditions that we need to make that.
Chair, could I just add one comment? I don't want to further complicate things, but in the interest of ensuring that all members of the commission are represented, I did receive an email from Commissioner Cotter, who is not here tonight. I received that early this morning. I just wanted to read a couple of his comments relating to the building and issues relating to the drive-through lanes. They, with the recognition that technically the drive-through restaurant use is not on the table at present, but I feel like it's important to share his comments just because he submitted them. So after reading the packet, I do have a concern with the proposed drive-through restaurants in commercial building on 2700, which again are not formally proposed at this point. The building itself is not very close to the entrance / exit of the development. However, depending on what type of demand is seen when either or both of these restaurants, there is a risk of stacking / congesting traffic throughout the parking lot. The Chick-fil-A on 12th Street has this problem, and the congestion within that parking lot around lunchtime or dinner is very challenging, especially for people trying to navigate through the lot for other reasons. This may be a non-issue since you identified the requirement for the 20-foot landscaping around the frontage to 2700. I'm to share his thoughts.
Good point. I hadn't done on the stacking, but we've seen it in other locations.
Hey, can I maybe ask one more question in terms of lighting? Is there no additional lighting at all aside from the building?
There is on the parking lots that's already existing. So the only spot that you would have non-new lighting is along that first side of the building. So
How about west of the building? I don't see anything detailed for any lighting down there.
I mean, the petitioner be open to potentially adding one extra lighting to the west side of the. Yeah,
There's just nothing to put it in, there.
You have your landscaped area.
Can you pull up the site plan? Can I come up against it?
basically,
You're gonna go where?
your building's right here.
Oh, yeah. Pull up the site plan.
Yeah, you kind of, these two cat.
The west one, the further left.
can that be a condition after, I mean, well, can that be something that is considered when we know the building lighting? Because I mean, the building is gonna put off quite a bit, and there's already your universal lighting in that,
Yes,
concrete portion right next to it.
yeah, you already have it right here.
Yeah,
So
so can we
I
consider?
feel it's gonna be sufficient off the building, but just that short of the distance. I'm not really, I don't do lighting, but we could recommend staff, but if it's chosen, we could recommend staff to look at that. But once they propose their lighting on the building.
Can I make another comment about it regarding your potential table? I know it, so,
Sure.
sure, okay, so potentially tabling this helps us in no fashion, because you guys need to give us some way to move forward. Because if the code is not changing, or you're not considering our drive-through and access, we're stuck. What do we do? So if you're gonna table us, you need to give us some sort of recommendation on how we alter this.
Well, if we table it, we don't have to, but if we do choose to table it, usually the commission will ask staff for a specific reason we're tabling it. Can you get us a definition for this? Can you get us?
Okay, as
you know,
long
some
as
more
there's
information?
something,
So it has to be something,
because otherwise we're stuck. We're really stuck.
and
Thank you.
Brandon, looked like you had something to, comment? Okay, any other comments or questions before we move forward? None of the answers, the one that you were ready to, yeah. Okay, opening the table, are there any recommendations at this time?
We left the berm, or the, I'm sorry, the landscaping as designed. Assuming we agreed that was an access, which I don't think everyone agrees that, but does, in order to do a 2.5 foot berm, you have to have a 20 foot, I mean, because it's gonna go really short, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, so the wider the landscape area, the more gradual the slope of the.
right.
So if it's shorter, if it's not 20 feet, the berm requirement doesn't go away, but it does make it more extreme. I don't know what the slope would be, but it'd be probably pretty close to.
So I was driving past, like Dutch Bros and where Jimmy Jones is at. If you look from the curb, it goes about that high. And then drops down into what I would probably consider their access lane that goes around the building. And I don't know, I didn't get out and measure, but it looks like it could be closer to that 2.5 foot. So where are we talking? Is the berm measured from?
I would just consider it to be 2.5 feet from, say, the grade of the soil at, say, the edge of the landscape area. So, if I can draw this using pointer, but it just needs to, it's like, you know, if this is, let's say this is where the curb is, well, it starts here, and then it goes up 2.5 feet at the center, and then it goes back down 2.5 feet.
And we'd be fine with the burden.
In the 10 feet? So I'm gonna make a motion that, what's that?
Take a deep breath.
That we, approve the site plan. And we consider that road, that drive, the access drive. So that, because I think that's what it is, personally, that's how I would interpret that. With the conditions, I'm just trying to look through this. Well, the berm's already in there though, that's part of it. So with all the conditions, I'm not sure if I want to read these or how you want to do this.
We just need to address these forward, not dumpster, that's 20 foot parking in the line.
Okay, so. Okay, my recommendation is that we recommend approval of the site plan. With the exception of the remove item number 1 on the address, because that's saying that we need to put 20 feet in, and I think that's an access drive. And so I'm saying you don't need that 20 foot landscape area there. But the other 2 conditions as noted by staff.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
are you satisfied with the parking?
I am satisfied with the
Okay, so the parking is adequate, no adjustments need to be made, and the lighting.
I'm fine with this.
With
Yeah.
the 2 staff.
Yeah, I'm fine with the site lighting. I think it's probably sufficient for what we've done.
And all other staff recommendations for this time.
Yes.
We have a motion on the table, so I'll open up for a second.
I'll second that one.
We have a second. Okay, now I'm gonna open it up for discussion amongst commissioners on the motion on the table.
Yeah, I mean, if you read item number E, the staff recommendations, parking lot lighting shall be required for any lot over 10 spaces in size. That west parking lot has 12 spaces.
We are one parking lot, we are one site.
But I'm talking the one right next to the building, has 12 spaces in it. And anything over 10 spaces is supposed to have additional lighting.
Okay, there is a motion on the table, is the person that's made the motion. Commissioner Holden and Dean second. Would you be open to amending your petition to add one?
I mean, if that.
Okay. So it's been an amendment to add an extra light on the west side of the building.
I think if it's deemed necessary, because the building lighting is inadequate.
Reviewed by staff, and if it's deemed adequate, necessary, that's been added as a request at staff. Yeah, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay, other discussion on the motion?
I just think it should be required. I mean, it is the ordinance. So why, we can't just go willy-nilly waiving ordinances to.
Okay, change it from a optional to required. Okay, the motion's been amended to state that the first item is stricken, the second part, the parking is adequate, and to add an additional light on the west side. Any other discussion, and all staff recommendations as written for staff, engineer, and fire department to be reviewed and updated and followed before any permits or release. Any other discussions on the motion on the table?
I think on this particular property, if that works, I think, as staff and planning commission, we need to look at that ordinance, the landscaping and the berm, and see, are there certain areas of the city that we are holding to that or not? And in the future, have a definition of what constitutes an access, so that when these things come up again, that we would have a clear understanding of what the ordinance is.
Any other thoughts? I'm going to give my opinion. I think the reason we put this in is for us to continue to try to enforce it within the community. If we need to address it, that probably should be done in about it later date and time. But if we just continue to keep pushing off, the next person's going to ask the same thing, and it's not going to keep it going to keep that barrier between the busy street and the business. If I was to table it, I would like to ask to give a better definition of the accessibility. You know, what can constitute as a driving typically considered an accessible road. To me, that's part of the business, and that's actually doing business. Both of those guys are doing business, so I think none of that is accessible. That's my opinion. But, no other further discussion. We'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Well, let's go ahead. We have, we'll do it this way. All opposed say nay, nay.
Can we read the motion by chance?
It's too late now. Motion's been made.
I just wanted to
You,
clarify.
you want it restated.
Let's restate it before you make your votes, we make sure that, the motion on the table is to eliminate step one, the 20 foot and the 2.5 foot. The 2.5 foot stays in the 20 foot, because that's part of this part. Parking is adequate, and it's to be added an extra light on the west side. Also, all staff recommendations are to be followed as for individual improvements for certain spot and see follow. That is the motion on the table. Right now, there's 2, 3, 4, 5 that are approved. David?
I mean, not ideal, but I'll go with the group.
Okay, so we have 6 yea, 1 nay. Motion's been acted upon. We'll go ahead and move on to the next item. Administrative item 3B, consideration of site plan for Rocky Mountain Dental building addition at 2703 North Parkland Boulevard. Go ahead, turn the time over to staff to present.
Thank you, Chair. This is again another site plan. It's really functionally speaking, it's a building addition. There's no proposed adjustment to the parking. The reason for that is that with the building addition, and given the use, the parking that's present on site still meets the required parking calculations for the proposed use, which is classified as office. This is a dental office. This site plan falls within the manufacturing commercial zone. And it's the purpose of that zone is to provide for light manufacturing uses as well as general and commercial uses within specified areas of the city. There's no proposed expansion of the parking lot or parking stalls. It meets the requirements as proposed with the existing parking on the site. The proposed building addition meets the setback requirements. The uses that the building that's being additioned proposed is in excess of 20 feet from the property to the west, thus meeting any applicable rear setback. And then there is language with regards to the side yard there's an exception to the side yard setbacks. It states that there's none unless it's a corner lot. Then what would be side lots have a 20-foot setback. That's not interpreted to be the remaining side lot where there's a 8 to 10 foot setback. I'll go to that detail in a moment, but it's saying that any side yard that becomes a front yard, because there's now 2 front yards on a corner drive, have a 20-foot setback. So that's staff's interpretation of that. So staff is of the understanding that per that interpretation, the proposed building addition doesn't meet the required setbacks. There are 2 submitted site plan documents. You'll notice I just said 8 to 10 feet on the setback. We have, and I think I know the answer on this, but the answer probably needs to come from the applicant on this when at the proper time. But there's one that's been submitted that's by Reeve and Associates, and there was an earlier version that was submitted at the time of a building permit that's been submitted for it. So we'll just pull that up and then and have them identify which they're counting as the site plan. There is also the issue of the height. Again, the standard for height is 5 stories or 65 feet. And the applicant, the proposed building is well within that. Staff would recommend that, again, as we've done with similar applications in the past, that they be permitted to have a little bit of variation from what's been shown on the site plan with regards to height. I've had some email discussions with the applicant. He's indicated that there's an issue with regards to what slope of the roof they're going to use, which had to make an adjustment to the height by within a foot or 2. I'm not sure if he wants to do 4-12 roof pitch or a 6-12 roof pitch, but either one would be dramatically within the proposed height setback. So we would recommend that condition of approval, just that those fine details we put in a little bit of adjustment for him. That was the height, requirement. And then again, per the parking requirements, the applicant's required to provide 14 stalls. They have 15 in total, thus meeting the standard with the current amount of parking that's provided on site. The applicant is well in excess of the 15% minimum landscaping they've got. They've demonstrated they have 59.9. And if we could pull up the site plan, it's going to be on around page 58 or 59.
Is it,
You can pull the Rocky Mountain down. What's the fifth or sixth one down? It should be on. 59. So it should be on page 4 of that document. So I guess I have a question for the applicant, if that's all right. If this is the proposed site plan, there's a second document that's later that was more basic, that's the next page. But I was understanding this to be the final site.
Thank you, Brandon. Jeremy Draco with Associates. And yeah, this is the site plan that we'll be using to complete the improvement.
Okay. Thank you. And then I'll go ahead and continue my presentation, and if the commission has further questions later, they can, you're welcome to make comments at that time. So staff recommendation is that we recommend approval of the proposed site plans. Again, basically a minor building addition, but the ordinance requires site plan approval in accordance with the city zoning code with the following recommended conditions of approval, allowing minor variation in building footprint and or height within setback while still meeting the setback and height requirements. And then the engineering with regards to particularly stormwater detention has not been completed as of yet, but what the primary role of the commission is to meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance with regards to this application, which on this application mainly just deals with height and setback, and then occupation of percentage of building occupation on the site. So staff is in the opinion that in all of those material respects it conforms with the ordinance, so that can be addressed and completed with our city engineer staff, and we follow that practice on the prior application as well, just so you're aware. Sure, there are questions that the commission will.
Do you have any questions for the petitioner?
I do.
Okay.
What is this new addition? What will be contained in that? Like, how many, is this adding operatories?
That's yeah, definitely. Okay.
So,
Is this one dentist too?
So it's one dentist right now. We're possibly expanding into some of it, and then we're just gonna do a big enough footprint that if we want to bring in like an endodontist or specialist, but we would keep it like in the professional, some similar kind of build. You know, like an endodontist would have less traffic than a general dentist, or at some point maybe even another general dentist, but the same type of a thing.
My concern is I work in a dental office and I know how many staff there are, and I'm looking at the parking. And you're not adding parking?
No, like I said,
So
we don't use half of the parking right now. I'm definitely not, I'm getting older, I'm definitely gonna get busier at this point, but within the ordinances, we were required to have like 14 3/4 with the size of the new building on it. And like right now, we only have 3 chairs in the office that we have. We're basically doubling the size of the footprint, which wouldn't be, most of that will be used.
How much staff do you have right now?
That
are there at the same time?
Probably 4 besides me. And then we have a lot of, down office, a lot of part-time things, not that same things.
Yeah, that answers, thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner or staff? when we make this staff recommendation, I'd like to highlight that this, the engineering department look at the rear, just the rear, retention, stormwater retention, but, Tyson, maybe you can help me out on this. It seemed like everybody on the west side had to do something, a major increase because of the flow or something on the west side of the street. Not that maybe else, we just want to make sure
Talking heighten the ditch.
Heighten.
on that.
that is something that was upgraded on. Everybody on that west side had to have something.
So a lot of them were just, heightening that ditch to the, and that needs a certain size.
So we had to upgrade it because of the.
I think there's, you're still open.
It's correct.
Yeah,
Okay,
so their section was open and it wasn't, it wasn't called out to require them to height that. A lot of them did it on their own.
Okay, so maybe just make sure that the engineer looks at that to see if there's anything that needs to be addressed or upgraded with the addition of the. Okay, nothing else? Would someone like to make a motion or any discussion?
Make a motion that we approve this site plan. Subject to the staff recommendations.
Okay. Mr. Wilkinson has made a motion, we have a second.
I'll second that one too.
Second by Dean. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Let's move on to a legislative. First one is a proposal of amendment 85 to RE20 residential. Start out with the staff presentation. We will look at public hearing and then consider conditions. Recommendation. One direction or the other, we can be different options to the city council. Whatever.
Thank you, Chair. I just want staff. So this is a zoning map amendment application, more often referred to as a rezone application that's been proposed. The proposal is to, on the part of the applicant, is to rezone, consider rezoning property that is at approximately 1100 west and north of 4300 north of the street to RE20 from the A5 zone. As the application was submitted, there were two parcels that were included in the application. The total of those parcels, the acreage is approximately 154 acres, and the area there looks like there's three parcels, but it's due to a road that's cuts through the parcel on the boundary on the county digital maps online. So there are just two parcels, and I'll just go ahead and review that statement that's made in our ordinance. It says the planning commission and city council will consider whether the application should be approved or disapproved based on the merits and compatibility of the proposed project with the master plan. And that's referring to the general plan and surrounding land uses and its impact on the surrounding area. They will also consider whether the proposed development and in turn of the petition for rezoning is needed to provide a service to the convenience spot brought about by changing conditions and which therefore promotes the public welfare. They may require subsequent changes in the concept development plan to achieve compatibility and may impose conditions to lessen or eliminate adverse impacts. We do have what can be referred to as a concept plan with this, which is it's sort of a preliminary plat for a 18 lot subdivision that is located adjacent to 4300 north along that what's currently a dirt road. There were some public comments that were sent about concerns about roads not being put in. That roads would be put in at the time of subdivision if a rezone were to be approved, but the issue on the table tonight is not the actual subdivision and road requirements. It's the issue of whether the property should be rezoned to enable the possibility of a subdivision that's at 20,000 square foot lots for single family homes. So it's not actually considering formally approval of that subdivision, but a prerequisite step. There's, you can see, if you're able to scroll down to the next page, you can see these are the two parcels that are proposed. They're almost square in nature when you put them together. That's the 154 acres. I've also shown snippets from the current zoning map, and then also from the future land use map, which is a little bit further below. They are two separate maps. The colors and the snippets that I chose end up looking virtually identical, but just to be clear, I did use the different maps. So showing the current zoning is highlighted in the orange box of A5 for the minimum lot size of 5 acres for residential dwellings and other uses on that property. And then the future land use map. This is this document is important because it's part of the general plan, and this is what's referred to as legislative decision. Legislative decision should be the issue on the table should be referred to in relation to the general plan, of which this future land use map is a portion or a segment of it. And so this second issue is from the second image is from the future land use map, which also calls for the future land use to be it's the category that uses, it's the same as zoning, but it's called the land use category, which gives a little bit more flexibility, but it specifically says in this area that it's rural residential 5, and it specifies 1 unit per 5 acres. And so it's important to note, you'll notice that the red line at the bottom is covering up the road in the area, which is again currently is a dirt road, but the boundary of that green segment is 4,300, or green portion is 4,300 north. And what the future land use map as part of the general plan is calling for in this area is for 5 acre zoning to be applied to everything north of 4,300 north, which is again consistent with what the actual zoning is adopted today. So it's saying that zoning, that type of zoning should continue in the future when these sort of decisions are made. I'll go ahead and read some of the segments relating to, in the general plan, when it refers to the future land use map, it does give descriptions of the land use categories. So I'll read from this rural residential category where it states, a rural residential 1 unit per 5 acres. It says the rural residential designation applies to the portions of the city shown on the future land use map, predominantly north of 4,300 north. To preserve the desired rural and open fill, emphasis should be placed on the kind of future development in order to limit disturbance of watershed features and avoid geologic risks. Development of this area should be either 5 acre lots or larger and be sensitive to concerns related to stormwater detention and control. Natural and historic geologic hazards should also be avoided. Development in this area must also be sensitive to watershed issues, geologic formations, and other potential community impacts, including hillside and slope stability, view sheds, and natural environment preservation. And I would just add that watershed issues that groundwater collection for our wells would fall under the issue of watershed issues, which I'll address a little bit more later. Rural residential development should maintain a rural character. Large portions of this area should be left as open space with trees and vegetation that will help preserve the watershed and water recharging attributes of this area of the city. Existing agricultural use should be encouraged within this area, and appropriate protections from development provided. Preservation and protection of open space are a priority. In order to achieve this priority, an allowance for planned unit development could be implemented, encouraging the clustering of homes in strategic locations which are largely free from other natural constraints, limiting the impact of development on city resources. Areas utilizing the planned unit development allowance should have sufficient safeguards in place to ensure the long-term viability of the open space. including homeowners associations and restricted covenants to own and maintain the open space as part of an overall open space plan. So this section of the general plan specifically states that development in this area should be either 5 acre lots or larger and be sensitive to concerns related to stormwater detention and control, or it later refers to potential, essentially what's referred to as a conservation subdivision with some sort of PUD type of mix where, smaller lot sizes are allowed as long as the preservation is preserved land larger than the plan in general, something along the lines of that concept. The general plan further states that emphasis should be placed on the kind of future development in order to limit disturbance of watershed features and avoid geologic risks. The foregoing statement is understood to relate to the source protection zone, which is shown in one of the exhibits in the nearby area, just as the following statement from the general plan also addresses water quality issues. Development in this area must also be sensitive to watershed issues, geological formations, and other potential community impacts, including hillside slopability, viewsheds, and natural environment preservation. These statements from the general plan are very clear that development in this area should be 5 acre lots or larger or achieve the same effect through preservation of open space. Additionally, they are fully clear that water quality and water supply issues should be a key consideration with regards to the development in this area. Given that the general plan specifies that protecting water quality and water supply should be key considerations, it should be mentioned that this area is also adjacent to the zone 3 of the Little Missouri Springs water source protection area in this locale in the city. A small portion of one of the lots overlaps. It's the easternmost lot in the concept plan. There's maybe 200 square feet on the lot that they overlap. We can show that if we need to.
Thank you.
And then it should also be noted that higher density in development affects the amount of impervious surface in the area. As with smaller lot size comes more asphalt due to roads and more concrete on the lots. And so